She may be a but she's my you know? The is mine. Gotta get her. Gotta get her.
It's February, y'all, and this month's theme will be Black love stories. We'll be kicking off this series with a classic favorite, the 2002 romantic comedy drama, Brown Sugar. This early 2000s film was one of my favorites growing up, but I haven't revisited it in years. Watching it again for this review brought on all the feel-good memories, the fashion and the hair trends, the iconic soundtrack, the popular artists of that time. It was a vibe that the early 2000s had that I miss so much. But while watching this movie, I noticed some things. But before we talk about that, it's time to recap. So let's get into it. So the movie starts off with us getting introduced to our main character, Sydney, as a youngster. Her older self narrates and she states that she starts every interview with the question, when did you first fall in love with hip hop? We see some of the top 90s, early 2000s artists detailing when they first fell in love with hip hop. Seeing all these familiar faces took it back for me. Time goes by so fast, but we go back to when Sydney first fell in love with hip hop. They found the perfect young actor to play young Sydney. She looks so much like Sanaa. But Sydney and her friend Dre first fell in love with hip hop when they saw Slick Rick, Dana Dane, and Doug E. Fresh freestyling in the park. What a moment. We fast forward to Sydney, present day, and today is her last day at her current job. She's just scored another job as editor-in-chief of a popular hip-hop magazine. This job will bring her back to New York where Dre lives, and Dre is currently A&R for Millennium Records, and he called in just in time to ask for one last favor before she leaves her current position. Now, he made the mistake of asking her for this favor while on speakerphone, and Sydney had to make him work for it.
Tell me something, does Simon know you went to bed till you were 12?
Hey, okay,
Dre finally says what she wants to hear, and she lets him know that the review he's begging for is in the bag. He also asks if Sydney will be coming to a Def Jam party, and she confirms that she'll be there later. Now, throughout this film, we hear Sydney talk about her love for hip-hop, but to her, hip-hop is, of course, hip-hop, the culture, the music, the style, but hip-hop is also Dre. Sydney goes on to say how she's watched hip-hop evolve over time and how it's always been there for her. So we fast forward to the Def Jam party where Sydney and her cousin Francine have just arrived and they are already turning heads, unfortunately. And from the moment Sydney sets her eyes on Dre, you can see the love all in her eyes. They were able to greet each other for only 2 seconds before their reunion is interrupted by Dre's boo thing, Reese. It's awkward initially, but Reese appears to be friendly and open to meeting Sydney. After Reese walks away, Dre admits that he's thinking about proposing to Reese. Apparently, Dre has known this girl for 5 minutes flat, but he's convinced she's the one and plans on proposing at the party. He does shortly after, and she accepts. Sydney watches the whole thing happen and appears to be happy for them, or at least she's really trying to be. We go to Sydney and Francine at Sydney's new place. They are finally getting some unpacking done and getting Sydney settled into her new place. While helping her unpack, Francine finds something interesting.
So, where does this go?
It's a massager from Brookstone.
Sydney goes on to say how she never seems to find someone who's on the same page as her, and Francine brings up Dre. Sydney admits that when they were in college, Dre asked her if they should try being more than just friends, and she told him no. And Francine thought it was never too late to try again with Dre.
So if you two hook up, you get the best of both worlds. You get the buddy and the boo.
Sydney goes on to say how relationships can be so fickle and she doesn't want to risk ruining their friendship. She brings up how Reese invited her to a bridal shower and Francine offers to get a gift for her to bring since Sydney is clueless on what to get her. Yeah, she's gonna pay for this later. But Francine couldn't help but to joke one more time about her massager.
So what you want me to do with your massager?
High speed. No.
So we fast forward to the day of the bridal shower, and Sydney is visibly awkward and feels out of place. During the bridal shower, they play a guessing game. Now, the questions that were asked were, what's Dre's middle name, fave drink, fave song, and you know Sydney knew all the answers. But question, do you think Reese knew any of these answers? Child, they've only been together for 5 minutes and she don't know their man like that. And it's crazy to think about because these are basic ass questions. But later on, while Reese is opening her gifts, she finally gets to Sydney's gift. You know, the one that Francine got for her to give to Reese. And let's just say, it was most definitely a Francine type of gift.
Nice.
Later on, Sydney meets up with Dre to give him the lowdown on the bridal shower. Dre states how Reese is the one, even putting her in a category he calls brown sugar.
You know, we all looking for wifey material. Fine, smart, classy, but not a snob. Hella sexy, but not a hoe. It's brown sugar.
You can tell from Sydney's facial expressions that she's a bit bothered by this, but later on, they go to a decor store to find some things for Sydney's place. Sydney brings up how being friends with Dre allows her to see how men view women, and child, Dre started talking mess about women and how difficult they can be.
Y'all too complicated. You keep trying to change every man into the Marion type.
Well, I guess Reese did a good number on you.
The shop owner comes over to suggest a decor piece, incorrectly assuming that they were a couple, and Sydney swiftly sets her straight.
Please, we are just friends, that's it.
Oh, sorry. I just thought if you need any help finding friend things, just ask.
I would have did the same thing. Went on about my business. It's not that serious to try and figure out y'all love status. Baby, I'm just trying to make a sale. But Drake gets offended that Sydney made it so very clear that they weren't together.
Why you have to say it like that? Please. Like I ain't shit.
Because you win.
Dre invites Sydney to an open mic night to hang with him as he scouts for talent. And while she refuses initially, Dre eventually convinces her to go. This is where we meet another member of the cast, Chris, who's a local rapper that Dre is interested in bringing to the label. Mos Def was so fine here. My God. But after he finishes performing, Dre goes backstage to meet with Chris and tries to talk him into signing with his label. But Chris already knows what's up, and it's not good.
You wanna sign me for Benny's and someone publishing for millions?
Chris admits that he doesn't think Millennium Records is ready for an artist like him and walks away without taking Dre's business card. And then we meet these two, the self-proclaimed hip-hop Dalmatians. Child, apparently they have signed with his record label and he didn't even know. And Dre is confused.
Cool,
Yeah.
Ren,
Rent 10 cents.
Rent 1010, Ren, what can I do for you?
And the next day, Dre had questions for his boss, Simon. Because what the hell?
Did you sign a new act without consulting me?
Dre, I saw him and I had to sign him. I had never seen no shit like that.
Dre tells Simon that he saw another artist that's more deserving of their time and resources, but Simon is not trying to hear that shit. He's trying to make a quick buck. And then Dre inadvertently gives Simon a very bad idea.
I could do a remake of The Girl Is Mine.
Yeah, you see, that's why I got you here. I'm gonna be able to call it, That Hoe Is Mine.
Yeah, we gonna see this fuckery come to fruition later on in the movie. But after this tragic talk with Simon, where Dre's basically told to shut up and do his job, Dre goes to Sydney's to get some clarity and much needed advice. Dre is frustrated at the state of hip-hop and hates that his record company is not helping the cause by signing artists like Ren and 10. He was very close to quitting on the spot, but he remembered his bills and that new wife he's gonna have and chose against it. Now Dre's over here feeling like a sellout, but Sydney tries to make him feel better.
And I punked out.
You didn't punk out.
Not even a little bite-sized melt in your mouth, not in your hand. Punk out.
Okay, maybe a tiny bite-sized punk out.
Dre states that all he ever wanted to do is make music, but instead, he's making deals. This is not what he saw himself doing. Sydney offers him a hug to help his mood, and of course, You already know what this hug almost turns into. When they both finally come down from their lustful high, Sydney asks him this.
Are you sure you want to do this tomorrow?
I love her, and I want to marry Reese. I love her.
Clearly you don't. This dude is getting married tomorrow and he's risking it all the night before. This is a bad sign. A very bad sign. But we go to the wedding. Dre and Sydney stare awkwardly at each other and Francine picks up on it and starts questioning her. Child, she was asking so many questions, being all loud while Reese was coming down the aisle. Sydney had to damn near hold Francine down to keep her in line at this wedding. But of course, Dre and Reese finished their vows and are officially husband and wife. After the wedding, Dre settles into his new life as a husband and Sydney settles into her new position at XXL. One day at work, Sydney is told by her assistant that basketball player and wannabe rapper Kelby Dawson would like her to interview him. Specifically her. Now, Sydney is hesitant, but hey, duty calls. And you know Francine couldn't wait to get Sydney together for this interview. She was determined to get Sydney out of the house.
I know you don't want to make that little friend of yours jealous, but you need the real thing.
It's a massager from Brookstone.
So Francine does a good job getting Sydney all dolled up for this interview, and Kelby has done his homework on Miss Sydney. He even knew what drink to order her. They have a cute little convo. Mostly, Sydney is surprised that he doesn't live a flashy life like other pro ballers. As they are talking, Reese and Dre walk in. How convenient. And Dre broke his neck to come over and see what was going on. And Sydney was so all up in Dre's business and face to realize she didn't even introduce Kelby. Child. And if this interruption wasn't enough, here come these two.
Yo, check your hoes and thugs, drugs and ice. Number 69, garlic chicken with rice.
I hope they go double copper. But even here, Kelby picks up on the weird energy between Sydney and Dre. He really should have followed his first mind. But back to this tragedy.
The hoe is mine. You gotta get her. You gotta get that bitch. The hoe is mine. You gotta get her.
And Dre almost had a whole breakdown hearing this. He's had enough at this point, and this whack-ass song served as motivation to finally quit his job at Millennium Records. And as luck would have it, guess whose cab he ends up in? Chris's. And of course, Chris got jokes.
What, so Simon owe you some money or something?
Nothing like that, man.
You can't hang out a window or no shit.
You know what?
Dre admits the real reason why he left his job, saying that he was tired of having to stand behind trash acts, and this appears to get Chris's respect. But he had even more jokes.
It's like the Grinch who stole hip-hop. Growing up heart. Got a grown-up heart now. Man,
Put a cab over me. You hurt my feelings.
But as Dre walks down the street, he has a vision of how things used to be when he and Sydney were young, and for a moment, he's really happy. When he finally makes it to Sydney's, her place has turned into a floral shop, and he was hating on her.
You must give good interviews.
And do. But they go to the park to talk. Dre talks about how good hip-hop used to be and how he yearns for it to be and feel the way it once did. Dre admits to Sydney that he quit his job and plans to start his own label, though he doesn't know how he's gonna fund this dream. And Sydney, being the good friend she is, decides to invest in her friend. I wonder how much she gave him, but Sydney gives him words of encouragement and he's thankful and feeling better until she tells him she has a date with Kelby later on that night.
No kissing on the first date.
Bye, Dre.
So, later on that night, Sydney arrives at her date and Kelby went above and beyond, shutting down a restaurant to cook her a meal. It was cute, and she was so happy. Meanwhile, Dre finally makes it home to tell his wife that he's quit his job, and she, of course, is not supportive. Reese thinks that he's made a hasty decision, and what makes it worse is that he didn't confide in her first.
First of all, how could you make a change like this without consulting me?
Plus, I know you would have just tried to talk me out of it.
And the conversation turns into Dre trying to explain to her her role as a wife, to blindly support him, even when he makes decisions that'll affect them financially without consulting her. And what made this conversation worse is him mentioning that he talked to Sydney about this first. Yeah, that didn't go over too well. We go back to Sydney and Kelby on this date, and Kelby is talking king shit about shutting down this restaurant for Sydney, which leads Sydney to wonder about his motivation for doing all of this.
You think you're gonna get some booty, don't you?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometime after Sydney makes it home, Dre calls to be nosy and asks her about her date. And he's asking all these questions and being an absolute hater.
Dre, the man cooked for me.
Did you actually see him cook for you?
No.
He's running game on you. That nigga ain't cook for you.
He is really trying to crush her little happiness, make her doubt this man. Let that girl get hers. And besides, he should have been worried about the woman he married. But back to Sydney and this very Ford moment.
Let's have sex now.
Let's.
Yeah.
So the next day, Dre hit the ground running and goes up to Chris's job to try and recruit him to his not-so-official label. Chris is still not taking Dre seriously, especially since he had the nerve to talk mess like this.
You're an MC that drives a cab.
First of all, I got a job. I ain't come to Millennium asking you for shit.
Eventually, Chris decides to give him a chance, if he does him a favor first.
Hold this. Take this.
How long is it gonna take you to clean the back seat? You want me to clean the back seat?
He really wants to sign this guy. But later on, while Sydney is at kickboxing class, she spots Reese flirting with the class instructor. Remember this face. But Sydney says hi and tries to be friendly, but Reese isn't for being too friendly since she blames Sydney for helping her husband come to a decision that she didn't care for.
So I guess I actually have you to thank for Court of Dre and this project.
The class starts and requires for two people to partner up, and of course, Sydney and Reese had no choice but to be partnered up together. And Reese wasted no time getting her frustrations out, letting Sydney know how she feels and revealing that she knows what's up.
Let it out. You have a problem with me and my friendship with Dre?
I have a problem that you're in love with Dre.
What?
Reese goes on to complain about how Sydney being so close to Dre and how she is yet to get him to open up to her the way that Sydney does bothers her. And during this heated exchange, we get to see how Reese doesn't take Dre and his passion for hip-hop seriously. She doesn't understand how much hip-hop means to him.
I never see him anymore because of this record label thing.
This label is more than just a thing to him.
Reese finally accepts defeat, and the fact that Sydney knows Dre better than Dre will allow her to know him. After this, we get a montage of Chris performing and getting some exposure. We also see Sydney working and her and Kelby getting closer. During this time, there is visible tension between Dre and Reese. Clearly, they are not seeing eye to eye. We go to Sydney having a get-together at her house for New Year's Eve. Dre appears to be doing better, and things are starting to happen for his label and his artists. While making his toast, he decides to acknowledge Sydney and the investment she made in him and his label. This toast was a bit too much for a so-called friend.
You are the perfect verse over a tight beat.
And rightfully so, Reese was very bothered, and Kelby decided to one-up the suspicious ass, lovey-dovey ass toast to propose to Sydney. And she said yes, and you already know Dre didn't like that. And listen to this.
So, what is the difference between rap and hip-hop? It's like the difference between saying you love somebody and being in love with somebody. Rap is just a word.
So, homeboy Kelby is rap and Dre is hip-hop. Ciao. Sydney and Dre are both wasting their significant other's times right now. Anyway, Dre comes over to Sydney to discuss her new engagement, and he had the nerve to say this.
Don't you think this is just a little too fast? You only known the cat for a couple of months.
About as long as you knew Reese before you got married.
He knew Reese for all of 2 seconds before he married her, and now he wants to have something to say about Sydney. Boy, if you don't stop. And then he had the nerve to suggest that Sydney was trying to compete with him.
That's right. You doing this whole competition thing? Well, I married Reese and you married Sasquatch.
Oh. Anyway, let's forget them for a second and focus on Chris trying to push up on Francine. As confident as he was on the stage, Francine had him all flustered.
Hey, that's a nice outfit. You look real nice. And the food was tight, too. It was tasty and nutritious.
And tell me why Kelby came over to talk to Chris, asking him to be his mentor. Is it me, or does Kelby give opportunist vibes? Something's off about this guy. And then Chris goes over to Dre and tries to get his advice on how to approach Francine. And Dre's drunk ass gets out of pocket.
If you're scared of women...
Whoa, bro, what you talking all loud, man? You don't know what this party, this how rumors get started. What's wrong with you, man?
Meanwhile, Francine is asking Sydney about Chris. It's a love connection brewing, even though they are making it very awkward. And Reese walks over to Kelby trying to pitch her services as a lawyer. Maybe they're both opportunists, but they quickly bond over their disdain of Dre and Sydney's close friendship. And Dre is still running behind Sydney's ass trying to understand why she's seriously considering marrying Kelby. He didn't plan on Sydney dropping some tea about his wife and her flirty ways at the gym though.
Seeing her at the gym a lot lately, and other guys trying one game on her, and I don't know, she don't seem to mind.
Dre brushes this off, claiming that Reese is just a flirt and that's who she is. And then he insists that Sydney must be jealous, and of course, this sends Sydney over the edge.
I got a man who's fine, intelligent, successful, and gives it to me on a very, very regular basis, and the shit is the bomb. Ray, I need you to be happy for me, so I can have tea and eat cucumber sandwiches with the crust cut off.
They are truly a mess. But Dre calms down and admits that he's happy for her and he'll try to mind his business. While he gives her a hug, Kelby and Reese look on and they are both feeling even more weird about this so-called friendship. We fast forward to Sydney watching Kelby during practice. She brings up some things related to the wedding and Kelby isn't interested and tells her to decide on his behalf. The conversation shifts to Sydney being unsure about what she's written for her book and she asks Kelby his opinion on her most recent piece she wrote. Now, Kelby tries to act like he read it and says that it was good, but he later admits that he never read it. Kelby wasn't really interested enough in what she had going on. The only article he took the time to read was about him. See why I'm getting opportunist vibes? It's clear at this point that they don't really have a solid bond. We fast forward to Sydney being in the studio with Dre, and Dre gets a text that's clearly not meant for his ass. He and Reese have somehow switched phones, and now the warning that Sydney gave him about Reese is making hella sense right now. So they jet off to a restaurant where they catch Reese and this gym instructor having a little date. Child, Dre walks over like everything's cool.
How you doing?
Hey.
And Reese is all flustered as the truth is revealed that Dre is her husband. Now this guy, Richard, didn't know any of this and immediately apologizes. But it's cool though, because according to Dre, it's time to celebrate.
Because we finna celebrate.
Dre.
We gonna celebrate what? My divorce. How about that?
Tay Diggs is hilarious. We really don't give him enough credit. But later on, while they're at Sydney's place, they reminisce again about when they were younger and Dre recites a line from one of Sydney's first articles.
Simplicity provides a fine line between eloquence and plainness. That's a dope line.
Now, Kelby could care less about what she writes, but old boy Dre can recite a line from her very first article. And then he admits that when she left for LA, he will go get a paper every Wednesday and read her articles. This man is in love with her. And then he drops this bomb.
I'm glad I know now. I guess I always knew deep down inside that we weren't meant to be together.
Dre admits that after the events that happened on the night before his wedding, he tried to shake the feelings he had for Sydney, thinking he could grow to love Reese, but yet and still, his feelings for Sydney were stronger and they never faded. Now, Sydney tries to pull that we're just friends shit, but girl, stop lying to that man. And most importantly, stop lying to your damn self. And of course, they start kissing and getting all intimate, and they, well, yeah. After they do the do, Sydney tries to act all surprised like she don't know how she landed on the D. Girl, But Sydney insists that what they did was a mistake and she still plans to marry Kelby. And you already know Dre was not trying to hear that, but Sydney tried to let him down easy.
What just happened was the most amazing, fulfilling, most exhilarating 5 minutes I've ever had in my life.
10 minutes.
7.
9.
Okay, 8, whatever.
Sydney tells Dre that them being so close is a problem for her relationship with Kelby, and he asks this question.
Why does it have to be all or nothing?
Anyway, we fast forward to Sydney trying to play her role even though she knows deep down that her heart is with Dre. And Dre is at a hotel getting accustomed to his new normal without his wife. The next day, Dre heads to Hot 97 to try and get Chris's record on the radio, and sensing that Dre is nervous, Chris tries to give Dre some advice.
You know, when you go in there, just be firm with them, you know what I'm saying? Just don't punk out like you could with City.
And when Dre tries to put him in his place by bringing up Francine, he says this.
About it. I'm not the Humphrey Bogart in this. I'm the Peter Lorre. I'm the sidekick character. You the Humphrey Bogart.
And then it goes left from there.
Then he needed to stop fine-ass Ingrid Bergman from getting on the plane with the corny dude. And then he gonna walk off in the fog with some other dude.
And Tay is so extra.
Hope you don't think you walking off no place with me, man. All right, matter of fact, let me sit over here. Just don't fight it.
And where did Troy come from? That man been fine all his life. Anyway, Dre finally makes it back to try and get Chris's record played, and this lady was paying him no mind. On the phone the whole time, not even listening to the record. I would have been pissed, especially after waiting all damn day. We go to Sydney coming in to fuss at Dre, thinking he submitted Chris's record for her unsigned underground review. Now she's pissed because she told him she needed space. And also, he's trying to use her to get his artist on. Oh, and it's an obvious conflict of interest if she gives it a good review. Sydney ended up having another member of her team review the record, and it wasn't good. And Dre insists that Sydney interjects and redo the review, and this conversation shifts to hip-hop. But hip-hop, in this instance, is them. Dre expresses his frustration with Sydney, how one day she's saying that hip-hop should change, and then the next saying it should stay the same. Dre suggests that they both look back to realize what they have, or at least what went wrong, so they can see things more clearly.
And if we just can stop, then maybe we can find that thing that we both know is missing.
Are we still talking about hip-hop?
Absolutely not. Dre tells Sydney to follow her heart and take a second listen. Again, he's referring to the music and their relationship. The lines are blending at this point. But Sydney walks off, not giving him a clear answer, and Dre is frustrated. Later on, Dre meets with Reese to talk. Reese tells him that she went to see a divorce lawyer and she was asked if they tried to make it work, and she realized that they never tried. So Reese insists that they give their marriage a fair shot.
You took those vows, Dre.
You broke those vows.
This dude really tried to forget what happened the night before their wedding. Like he didn't play a part in their marriage imploding. Now, Reese is trying her best to convince him to stay, but Dre knows that their marriage isn't going to work.
But I think we both know that this can't work. I don't know if we have enough of what it takes to make this last.
I think he liked the idea of her and maybe even loved her, but he always preferred Sydney. Dre and Reese quickly come to terms that their marriage is over and they end things peacefully. Meanwhile, Sydney meets with Kelby, and Kelby is pissed at her for missing a show they plan to see together. Kelby finally confronts Sydney about her friendship and feelings for Dre.
I love you.
But not the way you love him.
Sydney gives back her engagement ring, and at this point, their relationship is over. There's another montage, and we hear Sydney stating that she thought she would outgrow her love for hip-hop, but she's learning that that's not the case. Her love for hip-hop has grown and matured.
My feelings have never been more clear, and I know they will never go away. To hip-hop.
We fast forward to Dre going back to Hot 97 to get Chris's record played, since the first time he came up there, this lady barely paid him or the record any attention. This time, Dre was not going for the okie doke.
So I figure I'm gonna show up every week till you take a serious listen to this CD. Then I'm gonna come back every week until you put this here CD in a rotation. Every week.
And it works. So later on, while Dre and Chris are waiting for this song to come on the radio, Chris brings up Sydney. Dre is still hung up on her, of course, but while they're playing around, Sydney is currently doing a radio interview at Hot 97 with Angie Martinez. She talks about her upcoming book and what it's about, and Dre finally quits playing around with Chris and notices it's Sydney on the radio. As Angie Martinez tells her to announce the next record, she says this.
To hip hop, I used to love you. I still do. And always will.
You better go get her, Humphrey.
And that's all Dre had to hear, and he and Chris take their happy ass on down to Hot 97, calling into the station along the way. As he gets on the line, he has one question for Sydney.
Sydney Shaw, when did you fall in love with hip-hop?
Now, Sydney starts to go into how she fell in love with hip-hop, the culture, but Dre wanted to know when did she fall in love with him. And Francine's been waiting for this moment, and she, like all of us at this point, just wanted them to be together already. And Sydney finally admits the truth.
I've been in love with you from the first day I saw you.
Honestly, this whole radio appearance was supposed to be about her book, and now it's turned into a love connection of sorts. If this was real life, she would have gotten booted off, I fear. But this is a movie, and we love this cheesy shit. Anyway, Dre finally makes it to the radio station, and he just so happens to ensure his artist's record gets played and finally seals the deal with Sydney at the same damn time. He was multitasking, okay? But Dre finally makes it to where Sydney is and finally admits his truth.
I have loved you from the first time I laid eyes on you.
And of course, we get this cute moment of him asking her to be his boo. Child, not the old school, wanna be my friend, yes or no note. He took it all the way back with that one. Do kids do this anymore? And this goes over well, and finally Sydney and Dre make it official. Thank goodness. About damn time. And Chris is still trying with Francine.
Prince.
Huh?
You wanna go out with me?
Yeah, if you want to go out, let's... Oh, that's great. I'm a goer.
Not Sydney and Dre's love rubbing off on everybody, but Chris's record finally gets played on the radio, and that's pretty much the end of the movie. And here are my final thoughts. It had been a minute since I watched this film, but I must admit it's still as much of a feel-good film as it was back in the day. Seeing all the hip-hop artists in the beginning of the film took it way back for me. And it also made me sad because hip-hop was so intentional back then. People worked on their craft, they had things to say, shit to prove. People really took their art seriously, but now it's just another bag to grab. It's unfortunate, but as far as Sydney and Dre's love story goes, it was a miss. Honestly, I feel like Dre settled for Reese because she was the closest thing, or maybe the best thing he could get, since he couldn't have who he really wanted, Sydney. I believe he always wanted her, but since college, when she told him that she would rather be friends instead, he tried his best to accept it, but the feelings never went away. And even though Sydney did say she preferred them being friends, I felt that she secretly always wanted more, but valued the friendship way too much to lose it. I guess for her, it was a situation where she would rather have a piece of him than get with him and it not work out and lose it all. I believe she started to regret that decision when Dre announced that he was planning to marry Reese. But when they almost went all the way the night before the wedding, that's when things shifted for the both of them. I believe Dre still married Reese because at that point, he felt it was too late to turn back, or maybe he was waiting for Sydney to confirm her feelings for him. One thing I noticed was that Dre was fine with having Reese as his wife and still having access to Sydney, but when Kelby came along and showed genuine interest in Sydney and started to threaten that access, he started to be more upfront about his feelings for her. He even tried to plant seeds of doubt in her head about her and Kelby's relationship. Now, Kelby spotted that something wasn't right from the get-go with them, but he stayed with Sydney hoping that that wasn't the case. Or maybe he linked with her to use her hip-hop connections. Again, this guy came off as a real opportunist to me, requesting her to do his interview, trying to woo her while she's interviewing him. then having no interest in anything else she's written, just the piece she wrote about him, not even wanting to be bothered with planning their wedding. Dude was quite iffy, and Reese was flirting with a gym instructor, having secret dates and shit. Granted, this is after all this mess with Dre quitting his job and watching Dre and Sydney's sneaky ways. I hate how they led on their partners. Though they both were in denial about their feelings, that should have been a time where they stayed single to figure out what they wanted to do. And speaking of them being in denial, I loved how Francine was the only one that called it out from the very beginning with Dre and Sydney. She was down to stop a whole wedding to get them together. I really wish we could have saw more Francine and Chris. I would have liked to see them go out on a date. Francine had Chris flustered and uncomfortable, honey. It would have been funny to see. I also wish we could have saw Chris's career and Dre's label blossom as well. But all in all, it's still a cute movie and it's still the test of time. Anyway, that's it for this review. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. As for the next review, all I'm gonna say is 2010. This film stars two hip-hop icons, and child, this was a messy and unexpected love story centered around basketball. See you next time, you guys. Bye.